in second grade, as I recall, I made a macaroni map of the United States. And my mom thought it was really cool, and she kept it for the longest time. And I'm like, wow, so I've been a cartographer since 1972. Or maybe not, but I'm here today to talk about my experiences as a nautical cartographer in the Marine Chart Division circa 1990. It's the year, basically, the year that I started. And in that time, it's the era of pen and ink cartography. Oops. Well, let's see. I have no idea how to make this thing work. Arrows. Spacebar. Oh, there we go, of course. Wait. Next, let's see if that'll work. There we go. Yes. Welcome to the graphics database unit. This is the group that I worked in. There's me. 1990, the era of light tables, mylar charts. The graphics database unit was the group that I was in. Yes, we had a database, but the database consisted of pieces of mylar. For every chart in our suite, we had about 1,000 charts. We had a mylar of the black plate and a mylar of the magenta plate. And we maintained those in the graphics database unit. And our function was, every week, each one of the Coast Guard districts throughout the United States would send us a local notice to mariners. And we would apply the information from those local notices to mariners to the mylars using pen and ink. Oh, and look, and we did have a computer. I'm trying to remember what we used it for. We had email. We used it for email. Here's your desktop, circa 1990. You have to imagine this is a light table. We do not have a light table in the Marine Chart Division anymore. Our light tables went away back in the summertime as we reorganized everything, and everybody got new improved cubes, meaning smaller cubes. But we didn't need bigger cubes because nobody has a light table. So I had to fake a light table. I found a light table and I set something up to look like a light table. These are your cartographic tools. So here's your mylar chart. I've got some registration pins because I have to register the magenta plate to the black plate to make sure everything's in alignment. I have my electric eraser, my local notice to mariners, dividers, a rapidograph pen, an erasing shield, a bottle of ink, a crow quill pen, an X-Acto knife, a piece of carbon paper, and the all-important over here, a piece of cheesecloth that you would use to clean off your quill pen after you had finished inking. So those are the tools that you have at your disposal. I'm going to throw you in the trenches. When I'm done with this, you'll be able to go back in time and apply for a job at the Marine Chart Division, and they'll put you in the graphics database unit. I'm going to zoom in on the cartographic tools. So the electric eraser you would use to erase the emulsion off of the mylar. So if there was a correction that needed to be done to the mylar, you take your eraser, the little trigger right here, hit the trigger and you go, and you could just start erasing away, taking off the emulsion. The dividers you would use to scale out the positions of various features that were called out in the local notice to mariners. So you would scale out what the latitude was with the dividers, and then you'd take the piece of carbon paper and you'd swing a little arc along one line of latitude, and then you'd get the longitude, and you'd swing an arc using the carbon paper underneath the dividers on the line of longitude. So you have your latitude and longitude lines marked, and then you make an intersection off of both of those, and X marks the spot. So that would be the location of your feature. So once you found your feature, you would erase it with the eraser. Sometimes you'd use an erasing shield. That's the metal flat piece of metal there in the middle with all the little holes in it. But more often than not, you could you could zero in on what you needed to erase, and you didn't need to use the erasing shield. The rapidograph pens, everybody had a set. Sometimes you would use them, but they always clogged up. And we had an ultrasonic cleaner in our group that you could turn it on and you could put your pen in the ultrasonic cleaner, and in theory, it would clean the dried up ink out of your pen, but within an hour or two, it would get dried up again. So I always used the Crow Quill pen, because you just put a little drop of ink on the quill, and you'd make your change, and you were done. The X-Acto knife was sort of the don't use it tool, because if you started scraping up emulsion with the X-Acto knife, invariably it left some kind of scrape or scoring in the mylar, and when the ink would hit the mylar with that scoring, it would tend to bleed out. So that was, sometimes you used it, you tried not to. And of course, the little bottle of red ink. So your task for today is apply these AIDS corrections to chart 1660. So here you have a variety of changes to the ranges of lights. You would have to scale out each of these positions for each of these lights on the mylar, and you have to change. So that became a 6, and that became an 8, and that became a 5. So you just went from place to place across the mylar chart, erasing and inking and erasing and inking. When you were all done, you would count up the number of corrections that were made to that chart, because every charts are on print cycles, and some charts are printed at regular intervals. Other charts sit and languish, and once they have a certain number of corrections that have been done to them, that raises a flag to us that says, time to think about making a new edition of this chart. So that's where the number of corrections that were done came in. Here you can see those changes added up to 10 total corrections. A revise a characteristic or move a position, that was worth 2, but adding a buoy, deleting a buoy, that was just worth 1. So there was a running tally of the number of corrections that were made. I seem to recall there was a time when I remember seeing a chart that had 360 total corrections that were done to it. And everyone was thinking, why aren't we printing that chart? That's a huge number of corrections. Inking. Everything that was done had a particular color of ink that it needed to be done in. If you were making corrections that were intended to be printed as black, you inked it on the black plate with red ink. If it was going on the purple, which is what we call the magenta plate today, back then they called it the purple plate, you inked it in red on the purple plate, and then you inked it in green on the black plate. So there was a very tedious but important. These ink colors were important. And we'll see this later on, because when the charts went to get printed, they would be sent from our office in Rockville at the time. They would be sent downtown to Main Commerce in Washington, D.C., and there were negative engravers that would take all of our inked corrections on the mylars, and they would transfer those corrections to the printing negatives that would be made into the print plates. So these colors were important because they told the negative engravers what they were supposed to do. Here you can see someone's actually done some inking on mylar. We still have a few of these in our possession. They would be thrown out and they would be microfilmed, and there was a batch that came back from being microfilmed back, I think it was back in the summertime, And I said, wait, before we throw these away, let's save some, because this is being lost, this information, how to do it and what it looked like. It's all slowly disappearing, so we held on to a couple of these. So here you can see the corrections, or maybe you can't see the corrections, depending upon how far back you are. Here's the correction that was made to this light. Someone erased the 6, I believe it was, and they inked in a 7. And then they put the letter E to signify the local notice to mariner that correction came out of. Over here you can see some other corrections. Someone's inked in a 4, and it's like a 4 3/4 for after 1990. 3/4. You like 3/4. I know, Shahab, you like 3/4. Oh, thank you, yes, you're right. And some other various inked in corrections. And every time I look at these, I think, that looks like my handwriting. And these are not, it looks like my handwriting, it really does, but it's not my handwriting. And I was thinking about it the other day. The reason why this probably looks like my handwriting is because everyone was trying to make it look the same way. And I think we actually did a pretty good job of capturing that same style amongst the, we had about 100 cartographers back then, I would say. About 10 in my unit. Oh, so that's some examples of inking. Each one of the letters with the circle around it represents corrections that came from a particular local notice to mariners. 7 minutes? Oh no. Here's an example of the notice to mariners with going down the side, the letters. It sounds really odd, but one of the important tools that we had at the time was a circle template and a Sharpie, because if you tried freehanding your circles, reviewers would get upset. You can't freehand that, what are you doing? So the standards had changed over the time. We're more focused on the cartographic standards, and the computers take care of the tools. Back then, we had to focus on the cartographic standards, and we had to worry about the tools as well. After you had inked the information on the mylar, you had a chart history that you had to fill out. So here we can see letter E is local notice to mariners 41 of 1990. The date on that local notice was October 10th, 1990. So what, 28 years ago? It was applied by Giamonto Joyner on October 30th, 1990. It was reviewed by Bob Elliott on the 7th of November, 1990. We have information like this going back in time at least to the early 1900s. We have it all scanned. We have it all on microfilm. It's easy to get a hold of. If you're ever doing cartographic research, we have a great collection of records. There's Bob Elliott. Bob Elliott was one of the reviewers in my unit. You can see the enormous amount of paper and mylar and things that are strewn all about his office, because that's the way it was. We had things laying everywhere at the time. There was not an empty table space. Another thing that we did in the graphics database unit, we would examine source documents for critical corrections. So a blueprint came in, there was a shoal. We had to put that shoal on the chart, and then we would send that across the hall to the Notice to Mariners unit, where they would write up that information, and they would send that in the mail to the Coast Guard. And then the Coast Guard would publish that information, and they would send it in the mail to the mariner. So during this era, for a Notice to Mariners to get to this mariner, talking maybe a month, possibly a little bit shorter, maybe a little bit longer, but it's certainly not like it is today, where if I had information at my hands, I could, in theory, get it out to the mariner this very day. Now, there are intricacies of how we publish the data, but if we really needed to get something out pronto, we can do it within that same week. Back then, not so. Here we have an example of someone messing up on their inking. This chart has gone forward, which means it went to the negative engravers. And as the negative engravers were transferring the information to the negatives, one of them noticed, hey, Rockville, green plate, not black plate. So they noticed somebody had inked something in the wrong color ink. And they were kind of being snarky. And they were sending back a, you screwed up, don't do it again. But when you think about the massive amount of information that we changed on these mylars, every once in a while something would slip through. And here's an example of that chart, the way it appeared on the mylar. And here it is as that printed edition. So you can see the reps where they were inked. And that's 7, where is it? The West Point Shoal, all that information. So the negative engravers had transferred all that information, and the chart was printed correctly. Any questions? My mentor, Eli, this guy knew more cartography than I would ever know. And he was a great cartographer, and he's looking at me saying, Yashu, Yashu, with his, but we still have this, his hydro board, crucial bit of archaic technology. When you were applying a hydro survey, you put that hydro survey up over top of that board so it wasn't laying down on your light table. So that was the mark of a master cartographer. If you had one of those, you were on the right track. And that, I believe, is it. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me.
Thank you. That was amazing.
Sure.
I'm going to follow up lots of questions.
Okay, great.
Just maybe one for now. Can you just briefly talk about how you did labels and typefaces? Were those done by template, by like a single clip and character, or by hand? Or
So we would ink everything by hand.
Yep.
We would try to make it as close as we possibly could to the correct size and the correct style. When it came time for a chart to be printed, there was a sheet, a type sheet, and you would record all the information that needed to be stuck up by the negative engravers. So you would write down the names of various things, and you would write all the point sizes and styles on this type requisition form. And then it went there, and once it went there, I don't know what they did. They did their magic, but we just inked everything as close as we possibly could to the size and stuff. So if it was supposed to be italic type, we'd write in italic. And that was one of the very important things that reviewers enforced was proper inking techniques. Make sure you make things look as best as you can. In the back?
So in my own work, we kind of struggle with this, and I'm hoping I might be able to glean a little bit from your experience. When a chart was revised and a new edition was put out for public use, how did you either notify that the old chart was not to be used anymore, and then once that notification was out, how did you, what happened to those old charts that should not be used?
When we printed a new edition of a chart, it would be advertised in the Notice to Mariners. So every mariner who got the Notice to Mariners would be flipping through their edition, and they would see chart 18652. Oh, there's a new edition of chart 18652. So at that point, the burden is on them. In theory, they would go out and they'd buy a new chart. But many mariners would prefer to keep their old charts and just continually hand correct those. And if the chart didn't have many hand corrections that they had made, it's not that crucial that they go out and buy one right away. I mean, they really should, especially if they have a very, very large boat. At the time it was probably $12 for a chart in 1990. It's not that much. But that was our way of handling it. We would publish, here's a new edition of this chart. And it's basically the same way we do it today. Many of these techniques that were shown in this slideshow have evolved through the computer era, and only now with ENCs are they really starting to change, and we're examining how we've done things in the past and why we continue to be, we have 1.5 feet in the past, and we're trying to get like these toes are in the future, and we're trying to get closer and closer into the future, but there's always the tug of war. So when I retire, there won't be anybody holding us back. No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. Time's up.
No. That's fine. I mean, we have a last session with a break. If there are more questions, all the group from NOAA, Marine Cartography, will stay here for during the break. So anybody that has questions can approach us, and I have business cards, so you can reach us by email later on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.